So Tom, there's before we get into our main planned feature for today,
Yeah.
I have like half a dozen or so ish micro follow-ups if you are of the mindset.
Go for it. Yeah. I follow up's great.
So we had talked a little bit about planning and productivity techniques, and I had mentioned in passing that I was using Todoist.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I get the little notifications on my phone, right, about, oh, this is due today, this is coming up, yada, yada.
Yep.
So I just wanted to share with you my latest message. It says, 16 overdue tasks today. 119 days ago, make master schedule. 119 days ago, put this week's schedule into Google Calendar. 119 days ago, prep the week's items. And then it goes on from there. So,
You are on top of things.
well, so this is illustrating what I think I was referring to back then, which is I love organizational systems and sort of architecting them from the beginning, but executing on them is the real,
Right. You never follow up on what you set out to achieve.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, not that I never do, but I certainly never follow the plan. Like I've been
Yeah.
very productive in the last X number of weeks and months, but it has not followed the intended recorded schedule. So it's funny though, like for the last 119 days, I could easily just dismiss these, right, until Todoist to stop yelling at me. But I like it reminding me that I'm not using it.
It doesn't make you depressed.
Doesn't make me depressed. I don't know. Maybe there is a little bit of self-flagellation going on there, right? Where
Oh, right. Okay.
I like to be reminded that I'm being a bad boy. I don't know.
So you'll just always leave those reminders on then, like the putting gravel in your shoes.
It is somewhat similar, yeah. I mean, and I don't know how healthy that is. Because if I completely dismissed it, then I would just forget about the fact that I haven't adopted a long-term organizational system. And I don't know whether that's a healthy thing. But such as it is, I thought you would appreciate that.
Yeah. If something stays on my to-do list for too long and then it just gets relegated to the back burner and it's removed, I don't leave it there reminding me like a white whale forever.
Right. You know, it'd be cool. You know how in Reddit rankings, it's a combination of upvote, downvotes, and how long it's been hanging around.
Yeah.
So even if you have, for example, a post that has 1,000 upvotes, eventually it's going to deflate and float to the bottom of the list. So I wonder if it'd be cool if there was an automated way to do that with reminder systems where you said this was a priority, you said you wanted to get it done, but if you continually ignore it, it just goes away.
Clearly, this wasn't a priority for you, so I'll just stop reminding you. Okay. I'm sure there's some systems that do that.
There's my great idea.
Okay. Micro follow up number 1.
There you go. Number 2, I saw what is one of my rewatched what is one of my favorite Doctor Who episodes of all time last night, and I just to any Two Big Geeks listener who is not a Whovian, or I should say is not currently a Whovian, it's a great episode to check out because it's independent of the narrative arc of the season. And it's also what I would call one of those Dr. Light episodes, right? Where he appears in the episode, but it's primarily its own self-contained story.
You're talking about Blink? Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
That's like the standard recommendation for new Whovians to get into.
It is. And, you know, initially I've Googled, what's the best Doctor Who episode? Blink comes up on a lot of lists. And so I looked through all the other seasons because I've seen all the seasons now just to remind myself. And I think there are several other good candidates, but just in terms of pure science fiction and just super creativity with time travel, it's just a really wonderful execution. So even though it is popularly recommended, I have to also give my upvote to that. Season 3, episode 10.
Yeah, the problem with it though is it's not, like you said, there's not a lot of Doctor in it.
Yeah, but it gives you a taste though. So I think part of initially getting into Doctor Who, if you have no idea what's going on, is what's up with this TARDIS and why is this happening and why isn't he just going over here and the Master, Daleks, what? So this is, if you don't like a self-contained creative time travel story with a little bit of whimsy and stuff, then you'll definitely not like the series. So I think it's a good litmus test in terms of, are you going to like how they do sci-fi adventures?
Right. It doesn't require any backstory or foreknowledge of what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kudos to Blink. I'm delaying a little bit here because I'm looking at my notes that I just scribbled down for micro follow-up.
Yeah.
And I can't read my writing in the first note. It either says Seren or Seven. Gosh, what does that say? Jaren?
I've got a piece of follow-up.
Yes.
Last time we talked, you went out of your way to make sure everyone knew
Yes.
that you were not responsible for that piece of debris you hit on the highway.
Yes. Yes, I did. I provided an in-depth explanation, referred to the charts that I provided in my defense that I presented to the judge, etc. So, yes.
I have a bit of follow-up on that.
That's good because you told me you wanted to talk about road debris, and I'm like, well, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, me and my wife were out driving on the highway the other day, and we hit a piece of road debris.
Great. Welcome to the club.
I know, and it was kind of unavoidable.
Wow. Now, were you driving or was your wife driving?
My wife was driving, and it was just an enormous piece of retread, basically in the middle of the left lane of the highway that she couldn't get out of the way of because there was no room on the left, because there was no lane on the left. And on the right, there was a big tractor trailer, and she couldn't slow down. And she made the judgment that the safest thing to do was to run over it.
Very similar to my situation.
Yeah, but it smashed the hell out of the front of our car, though.
And did it do any damage?
Yeah, the whole front end of the car is all plastic, like the mud guard or whatever is all smashed up.
Wow.
So I've joined the club.
Okay, so first things first. You and your wife are okay?
Yes.
Okay.
It just made a horrific noise when we ran to it. It was basically an entire tread from a 18-wheeler tire that just came off in one piece, and it was just sitting in the middle of the lane.
Yeah. I'm going to mark a couple of notes here because I have to jump off the tangent. I'm doing this a little differently now with my tangent jumping. I'm trying to leave myself a little breadcrumb. So when you said it made a horrific noise, Tom?
Yes.
And you can decide if the delicate nature of our listeners is ready for this story or not. So I'll allow you total freedom in the drop to the podcast editing room floor or not.
Yep.
When you said horrific noise, so years ago I was driving on the highway, going into work, virtually no one on the highway. I'm jamming to Superstition by Stevie Wonder, and out of nowhere, a turkey appears right in front of my car. I mean, it was like a quantum experience. One moment, there was absolutely nothing. The next moment, there was a turkey in mid-flight. And a quarter second later, bam, I went right into it. And
oh, dear.
Yeah, and I was on cruise control, and it knocked my cruise control off, so I started decelerating, and it just shocked me, right? And a few seconds later, I sort of got my bearings and got the car back up to speed, and I didn't see anything around me, and I thought everything was okay for a moment, but then
oh no,
a little while later, the temperature started going way up on the car, and smoke started coming out of the front of the vehicle. So I was like, all right, I was almost at work. So I was like, okay, let's see if I can get this to the finish line here. I was like a mile away or so. So I get off the exit, and now the engine is really starting to make like crickety crankety noises. And I get off the highway. I get the last quarter mile. It's sort of an incline up to the gate at my work, and it's really straining to get up to the. So I finally get up to the gate. At this point, I'm just planning on calling a tow truck once I get in the parking lot. And so I get to the gate, and the guard stops and walks over to me slowly, and he's like, because he sees the state of the car, and I was like, oh yeah, I hit something on the highway. I'm gonna have to call a tow truck. And he looks at me, he looks at the front of my car, and he says, did you realize you have a turkey embedded in the front of your car?
Oh no!
So the entire structure of the turkey had merged with the front of my vehicle. So I got it the last like 20 feet up the hill. And a friendly gentleman who apparently participates in the responsible culling of the local wild turkey herd assisted in removing most of the turkey from the from the car. There was quite a bit of it in all places there. And long story short, the car was totaled. But that is my turkey story. End tangent.
In tangent. In turkey.
In turkey tangent. Yes. And since then, I should say, because I work in a section of the state where wild turkeys are not uncommon.
Oh, yeah.
So anytime I'm driving around, and there does seem to be, they kind of know now that I had this run-in, and they'll sort of be walking in a little line across, because they don't mind cars, right? So they're just going about their business across the road, and they'll stop and give me the hairy eyeball, and
they don't mess with you.
We have a very, very tense truce.
Word has gotten around.
Yes. So even though I changed cars, I'm assuming they have a very keen sense of smell. So it's something I have to watch out for.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The second question I had for you is, so your wife was driving.
Yes.
So she's in the left lane. So I'm presuming that she does not have the same driving style as you. So she was going at or above the speed limit.
I don't recall the exact speed, but she's a very safe driver. But she probably has a different style than I do. Yes.
Okay. And then so now you have your insurance thing to work through.
Well,
where by default you'll be held at fault, and then you'll have to do the same thing I did and go have a little Q&A.
Well, I suppose the silver lining is that I already had received a big settlement check for having my front end damaged while in a parking garage. So it was going to be repaired anyway.
Oh. Now was that so? Apparently that was not your fault, getting your front end damaged in the parking lot.
No, it wasn't. At work, I park in an underground garage, and for quite some time, there's been some construction going on above ground, right above the garage, and the roof of the garage has been leaking. Especially when it rains, it's just water just pours through the roof of the garage because there's so much construction going on up there. So one day when we just had a huge rainstorm, and my car was just sitting under this leak, and water was pouring down through the ceiling of the garage all day onto it. On that particular day, all that rainwater was mixed in with cement.
Wow.
So the whole front of my car just got covered with cement residue.
Wow. What was your visceral emotional reaction to that discovery? You like, okay, whatever? Or did you stomp around and throw a fit, or?
No, I wouldn't throw a fit. I don't think I'd throw a fit. My primary concern was just how I was going to get home because the whole windshield was covered basically with cement.
Wow.
I turned on the wipers, and the wipers just went and did nothing. So basically, the manager of the garage was called, and he came out with a razor blade and carefully scraped the windshield, all the cement residue off the windshield with a razor blade, and so I could at least see out of the front of the car and able to get home. They afterwards paid to have the whole front of the car detailed by a professional, and they were able to take off most of the water cement residue that was on there, but there were still stains all over the front. So they cut me a settlement check for the damage.
That was nice.
So I have a lot of cosmetic damage in the front of the car. So some more smash up from the road debris is not a huge tragedy.
Okay.
So the car still runs fine. It just doesn't look very pretty at the moment.
Yeah. Well, if you get the opportunity to go to insurance court, I would suggest that you do. It is a pretty fascinating experience. If you enjoy rubbing shoulders with the greater mass of humanity, Tom, as I know that you do, it's an opportunity for you.
Got it.
So, okay, cool. I am not going to be able to decipher my previous note of Seren or Seven or Jeren or whatever it is. So I'm going to skip to my last piece of follow-up, which is, we got a nice message back from the lead author of the Resilient Cooperator paper that we mentioned in the Nikki Case last episode.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, so I had sent them, the authors of that paper, a message just to let them know that we found it rather interesting, and thanks for their work. Yeah, and so they took a listen to the podcast, enjoyed it. They said geek on, and we had a little clarification between what a resilient cooperator is and what an always cooperate is. If you recall the definitions from the Nikki Case, always cooperate is very simple. They always cooperate. A resilient cooperator, apparently, at least in the definition they're applying in this paper, is that at the beginning of every encounter with a new person, a resilient cooperator will at first cooperate. That is to say, if they've been burned on the first encounter with multiple people, it doesn't matter. They always, it's kind of like the fresh start philosophy, right?
Right. Their first inclination is to cooperate no matter what.
Right. Their core nature is not going to suddenly alter trajectory based on being burned by multiple people. However, if they are cheated upon, if they are defected upon, then they will defect for the rest of the iterations with that individual. Because the way they had this particular study set up is that each participant had 100 interactions, but it was 10 interactions with one individual, followed by 10 interactions with another individual. And I guess their study was also somewhat unusual in the field in that they did this with actual people over the course of time. This wasn't just a computer simulation or whatever.
Right.
And quite extensive with the number of iterations and such. So It's pretty interesting that you can have a field of theory that, for many years sort of advances along those kind of research lines, and then you can apply and experiment and practice, and then get more useful data out of that. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mr. Mao, Andrew Mao, was the lead researcher on that. Thank him for his interest.
We thank you, Dr. Mao. So what do you want to talk about today?
So I recently have had the good fortune to have some time to listen back to some of our episodes.
Oh, dear.
It's actually kind of cool, like being able to hear repeated themes and different threads that sort of come up just naturally.
Yeah.
And, in our first episode, we were talking about climate change, and that obviously has a big threat to human civilization. We've talked a little bit about being sucked into the matrix and technology and all that. And it raised for me a reflection on what my interests have been. Sometimes I'll get really into a topic and then drop it. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the common thread? And so Tom, I like death. Contemplating death.
Yes,
right?
I know.
Yes, and I know you like to avoid contemplating. So it's not just individual death or the death of an idea or whatever, but what are the death of culture, civilization, and species is also, I find, quite an interesting, fruitful topic. So in recent news, we've had a lot of natural and disaster and political events that have raised the thought of threats to civilization and the species to a higher degree than normal. Say that's fair to say?
Yeah, it's quite a lot of hurricanes, earthquakes, nuclear weapons, crazy despots, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So when I think of like things that could ultimately end the species, bring us towards the apocalypse, I start to wonder about what are the most likely candidates. The sort of metaphor I think of, I don't know if you remember this carnival game. It's this kind of horse race where you roll a ball up a ramp and it drops into either a 3 or 2 or a 1, and then so your horse advances that many spaces.
Yeah. Yep.
So I kind of think of all these things as like in this horse race competing to see who gets the honor to wipe us out.
Who's going to kill us first? Place your bets.
Yeah, so I contemplate things like, I don't know what comes to mind for you, Tom, but things like hostile AI, biotechnology, nanotech weapons, global war, nuclear holocaust, natural pandemics, global warming, environmental degradation, extinction of the species, inequitable resource distribution, human overpopulation, crop failure, non-sustainable agriculture, gray goo, particle accelerators, asteroid impact events, supervolcanic eruptions, lethal gamma ray bursts, the magnetic reversal of the poles, runaway climate change, alien invasion, amateur podcasters, dogs and cats living together. Tom, what is going to destroy civilization?
Perhaps all of the above. Take your pick. What's your pick? What do you think it's going to be?
Oh,
what's your favorite way that everything's going to be snuffed out?
So it's just to force myself to filter it down. Initially, the rule of 3 is a pretty good way to start. Yeah. We're talking about the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
And I just mentioned the carnival horse game. So I think of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Okay.
So I think that's a fun way to filter it down. And so when I'm trying to pare down this list, Tom, my first organizational characteristic is between man-made, or at least man very much catalyzed causes, and just natural phenomena.
Right.
When I think of the man-made ones, I think of these as most of these as potentially really setting back civilization, but not wiping it out. So Wikipedia would refer to this as catastrophic as opposed to existential threat.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Things that could do, untold amount of damage, knock us back to the Stone Age or beyond, but it's not going to wipe out Homo sapiens 100%.
Right.
I think of these things as more likely, and I also think of the solution to them as pretty much a consciousness evolution solution, where if we are only able to sort of cooperate and treat each other with more kindness and respect and value each other's existence, most of these things we can handle.
These are risks that can be mitigated through action.
Yes, we created the problem, we can solve the problem. So man-made accelerated climate change, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, nanotech, those would be my 4 catastrophic horses of the man-made apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
I also considered orgs and genetic engineering, and if we're living in a simulation, maybe the simulation ends. particle accelerator accidents, those sorts of things. But the climate change, nukes, AI, and nanotech were my 4 man-made horses of the apocalypse. In terms of the natural ones I think of as more existential threats in that they have the potential to completely eliminate the species.
Yes. Or completely eliminate all species, sterilize the planet.
Yes. So I think of these as less likely to occur in the near term, so more longer term threats.
Yeah.
And the solution then being what I would call the Tom Elon Hawking solution, which is become an interplanetary species.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So as much as I got excited about gamma ray bursts and magnetic pole reversal, both of which are pretty fascinating topics.
I love those. Yeah.
Yeah. I settled in on superviruses, supervolcanoes, meteor strike, and alien invasion as my top natural causes. And each of these topics are really fun. So I don't know what your initial... I wanted to get that organizational structure out of the way because a lot of this inspiration for classifying it like this came from what is now one of my favorite Wikipedia pages, Global Catastrophic Risk. It's really fabulous. To give it a little source credit, one of the philosophers / thinkers whose work seems to have contributed substantially to this page is a person by the name of Nick Bostrom. He's a Swedish philosopher at the University of Oxford who is currently the founding director of the Future of Humanity Institute. Apparently, he introduced this concept of existential risk as distinct from catastrophic risk. And but it's a really great page. It contains one of my favorite Wikipedia quotes that I have found in recent years.
What is that?
Which is, researchers experience difficulty in studying near-human extinction directly. Since humanity has never been destroyed before. And then there's a citation. And then, while this does not mean that it will not be in the future, it does make modeling existential risks difficult, due in part to survivorship bias.
That's good.
Yeah, that is just Wikipedia bending over backwards to be meta and objective, which is just, you just want to tussle it on the hair and say, oh, Wikipedia, we love you.
So you've got a list of existential risks and you have a list of catastrophic risks.
Yeah.
The first list you had of the man-made threats to human civilization. All those things can be hopefully prevented, we think. Is that right?
So I think so there's 2 arguments to be made. One is, could we get our collective consciousness and cooperation together to the point where we greatly reduce these? And then the second point would be, well, even if we don't, are they really an existential threat, right? Say we do nothing on climate change. The worst case scenario, and we're in a +5, +6C world, would Homo sapiens continue to exist?
Most probably, yes.
Yeah. There are probably some +6 and more C scenarios in which it really becomes uninhabitable. Right? But I think what we're probably talking about is civilization destruction more so than wiping out of the species.
Mm-hmm.
Because they talk about the Anthropocene as being the era that we're in. This notion that we're in the era of the evolution of the ecosystem where most of what is happening is because of man-made interference.
Yeah, future archaeologists would be able to look back at this time and study it by the huge layer of plastic that's everywhere in the world.
Exactly.
Plastic and chicken bones, I think, is the thing that archaeologists are going to expect to find.
Well, as George Carlin famously said, plastic came out of the earth. Maybe the earth just sees plastic as another one of its children. And that's the purpose of humanity, is to produce plastic. And then now that we've produced it, we can be phased out, right? So in the sixth extinction, as it were. Have you read The Sixth Extinction, by the way?
No, I have not.
Okay, this famous book about natural history review that came out a few years ago. Not specifically a climate change book, although it talks a lot about climate change. One of the striking observations in it is that the author's conclusion was that flora and fauna loss by the end of the 21st century will be about 20 to 50% of all living species on Earth.
Right. My understanding is the idea in the book is that there's been 6 major global extinctions on Earth, and we're basically in the middle of the sixth. Is that correct?
Yes.
We're soaking in it.
Yeah, exactly. And climate change, a temperature increase, right, is obviously a part of that. It's like one of the, it's maybe like the leading catalyst, accelerant, in terms of everything else that we're doing to the planet at the same time. Coral reef loss and all that, rainforests, all that business. So that's fun.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Of these catastrophes that can possibly be prevented, do you think humanity has a moral obligation to try to do whatever they can to mitigate these risks?
Do we have a moral obligation? So, Tom, moral is a touchy word for me.
This is why I'm asking you.
So, I've always struggled, having first been raised religiously and then come to my own personal approach to what I feel is spirituality, and then studying philosophy, and then thinking about ethics, and then ultimately unconditional love. I don't know where the word morality quite fits. To me, it has this connotation of some sort of static list of rules that one group tells everybody else should be the law of behavior. So I have a real hard time saying that someone else who I don't know, right, who looks at the world a completely different way, who makes their own judgments about the value of other life, whether I have the capacity to say, oh, you're obligated to do something. So I personally feel compelled to work for that.
Well, what about us as a species? You're not willing to say this is something we should strive towards, preventing a future catastrophe?
We should. So it's this should thing of like, I kind of feel like, so my imaginary poster child, right, is the very nice, non-violent, and yet keeps to himself Redditor who's just interested in things. And so for me to kind of reach into his or her universe and say, hey, you should stop just chilling and relaxing and doing whatever it is in the context of your world. You should stop what you're doing, or at least expand your scope of concern and work towards the betterment of humanity. I have a hard time imposing that on someone. And yet I do feel a personal need to not just grow that in myself, but to like increase that sort of global connectedness feeling. One of the more inspiring quotes I found on it when I looked a little bit, I've been looking in the last few months of what a spiritual and religious and other ethical and moral thinkers have to say about climate change. Because a lot of the press that we see is from either scientists or politicians.
Yeah.
Or our associates on social media. So I was interested in just across the gamut, right, what people think. And my favorite quote was from a prominent Buddhist monk. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh. So his quote is, "Now is time to begin to learn how to love in a non-discriminatory way, because we are intelligent enough, but we are not loving enough as a species." So I really like that because he talks about, okay, we've evolved our intelligence and therefore our capacity to create technology. And he's not saying, yo, everybody has to be a saint. He's saying we're not loving enough. That is, there's a certain compassion or just pure-hearted concern for the other that is an aspect of evolution. It's not a static thing, but this is a capacity that can increase and that we can learn to grow in consciousness. And so I guess the other horse race, I've mentioned this before, the other horse race I think about is, are we going to raise that level of cooperation as a species prior to the technological evolution that will then destroy us? So yeah, so I guess I have a hard time at the end wagging my finger and saying, y'all should do this. Because ultimately, if it doesn't come willfully from the heart, right, of people growing this within themselves and of their own volition, then I'm not sure how long and permanent that kind of change can be. Well, what do you think?
Well, I'm a big proponent of wanting to be an interplanetary species.
Yes.
I think it's very important for us to get off this rock as soon as we can for the preservation of our civilization and our species. So I think we do have a moral obligation to do what we can to mitigate these things, considering the potentially billions and billions of people that will come in our future.
Right.
And potentially our interplanetary civilization that could possibly be in our future, which could be, smothered in the cradle if we just twiddle our thumbs and let things get out of hand.
Right. So the interplanetary is not only the solution to natural catastrophes that we have no control over, but it also would buy us some more time such that we don't by our own hand destroy ourselves from some of the man-made catastrophes.
Yeah, I think it's the best case scenario as a path forward to mitigate a lot of the existential threat to humanity.
Yeah,
and the Earth.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see that from a practical standpoint. You know, you just want to give yourself some more playing field so that you don't burn the whole thing up. I do sort of sometimes when I watch Doctor Who and it's like the year 300,000 or whatever, and people are still acting in an immature, selfish way. I kind of like, oh well, it's sort of depressing to think that humanity would have hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and yet our consciousness would not have evolved to that extent as well. Although I suppose it's also possible, right, that all consciousness doesn't evolve in lockstep.
Mm-hmm.
Say we become a 10-planet interplanetary species. There could be some of those planets that are very selfish and self-destructive, and other planets that grow a more selfless view of the world for whatever reason. And so we're giving ourselves more iterations, not just from a technology management standpoint and a insurance from natural disaster standpoint, but just more rolls of the dice to see if we can get it together from a consciousness standpoint.
And even if these 10 different planets become culturally isolated at some point in the future, they can still develop on their own. Just like the Pacific Islands.
Right. Quick tangent, Tom. Your brief thoughts on probability of life on other planets right now?
Brief thoughts.
Yeah. Squeeze that right in there.
Yeah. I don't know. My gut saying is, of course, on Earth, life inhabits every single nook and cranny it can find its way into.
Right.
Surely that has to be the same out there in the universe, because there's nothing especially special about the Earth. What we see here in our local solar system and our local part of the galaxy is pretty much the same as what we see everywhere else in the observable universe. So to think that we are somehow special and are unique seems improbable to me.
Right.
On the flip side of that, when we do look out into the universe, to all intents and purposes, it appears completely dead.
Okay.
So I don't know what to think.
Right. Yeah, that's roughly the, I would say, the current state of the gosh, I'm going to forget the name of the formula right now. Spacing on the name of it.
The Fermi paradox? No, the Drake equation.
Yeah, so both. So the Drake equation is the formula, right? That based on number of solar systems with planets,
it makes the best guesstimate of how probable different life will be in the universe based on all the different factors. And the Fermi paradox basically asks the question, based on that probability, where is everyone? How come we can't see anybody? If there is a non-zero probability that there is life out there, why can't we see it?
Yes, and with every year that passes, the Fermi paradox becomes more demanding of a question, I would say, because all the new data we're getting about exoplanets is that the number of solar systems with planets is pretty much almost all of them.
Right.
Like compared to 20 years ago, the probability of the number of planets in the universe and the number of planets in that zone that support life is way more than we used to think. Yeah. So you compound that against the size of the universe, and yeah, I mean, so briefly, yeah, I would agree that it would be statistically shocking to the point of illogical if the universe wasn't teeming with life.
Mm-hmm. But we don't see anybody out there, so that leaves the question of what is going on.
Yes, my initial thought on that is that it either means that civilizations destroy themselves or they achieve a balance of non-destruction, of equilibrium with the natural environment, in addition to a determination to not communicate with civilizations that have not achieved that equilibrium, or not a need to communicate.
Right. So you're saying we don't see them because they're not talking to us.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Have you come across the concept of the Great Filter? Have you read about that?
No.
That's another idea that's related to the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox. Basically, it's the idea that if you look at civilization as being a kind of a ladder between at the bottom rung being inanimate matter and at the top rung being a interplanetary galaxy spanning civilization.
Yeah.
There's a number of steps that you have to go through as a species and a civilization. Basically, going from inanimate matter to life, single-celled life, multi-celled life,
Yeah.
tool using, space travel, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the great filter, the idea of the great filter is that since the fact we don't see anybody out there, there must be one of those rungs in that ladder that's highly, highly improbable. And that acts as a filter to prevent a civilization from expanding out into the universe.
So it's like the chance of reaching the top of the ladder is maybe 1 in 100,000. And so you need a lot of rolls of the dice.
Right. And so the question is, which one of those rungs is the improbable one? Is it going from inanimate matter to living matter? Is that what's unique on the Earth? Or is it something higher up on the ladder? Or is it something that's going to be in our future, which is the scary thought? do civilizations get to the point where we are now on the verge of being interplanetary and then something wipes them out?
Yeah. Yeah. My thought on that is hard to separate from what I would say is the strong possibility of proximity bias. I think there's always the tendency to overestimate the import of the current era.
Yes.
Like it always sort of, the time that you're living in always seems like the most pivotal time in the evolution of civilization. But even though every time is pivotal in the sense that you're at the leading edge and the future hasn't happened yet, yeah, there are some times that are more pivotal than others. I think just in the context of what we're talking about, up until this point in the history of the Earth, there has not been a species that has evolved technology capable of destroying itself. There's the other, so we still don't understand the nature of consciousness either, right? Mm-hmm. So there's the possibility that as civilization evolves, consciousness reaches a certain point of capacity to decouple from the physical evolution of the universe, and then consciousness just goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
A different aspect of existence that we could not describe right now because we have not yet reached it. It's a nice little logically self-fulfilling argument that frustrates the heck out of physicalists. Yeah, so that's cool. But getting back to the horse race, Tom, because our listeners are going to run to Vegas and place bets on this, so we gotta.
Gotcha. Okay.
We gotta cover this.
So who are you putting your bet on?
Okay, so to finish out the man-made before we get to the more exciting natural.
Yeah.
I find more exciting natural. So climate change, nuclear war, AI, and nanotech. So nuclear war. I've thought of nuclear war for a while in the sense that to me, it seems just logically that it's inevitable. So there's only two possible outcomes of our current iteration of civilization. Either we do have a nuclear war and it causes mass devastation, or we don't.
Yeah.
And so I find it highly improbable that we would discover this, that we would be one step away from the use of it by unstable governments in the state of consciousness that we currently have, and that we would get to the end of all civilization and never having had a nuclear exchange. That seems, given the amount of time that they're going to be hanging around.
Yeah. If you look at your other choices there, out of control, climate change, AI, and nanotech, those are all potential threats in our future, but nuclear weapons are here right now.
Yeah. So I kind of see that as an inevitable catastrophe. It's just, the question is just to what extent will it be and when will it happen? I'm sure you're familiar with the doomsday clock.
Yes, the Bolton of the atomic scientists.
Yes. And they've recently, by the way, added environmental change as one of their factors to moving the hand of the clock. I'm not sure if you were aware of that. But they've been tracking this minutes to midnight visual, right, which is very evocative in the press coverage of these events.
Where does it stand right now?
2.5 minutes. Oof, midnight.
That's pretty close.
It's kind of not good.
No.
The Wikipedia article has a great link to the chart of how it's been moving since its first U.S. and Soviet thermonuclear tests.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty close during those first tests, and then it got further away. That is to mean safer. And then since the fall of the Soviet Union till now, it's been getting closer and closer. Now also includes climate change, and most recently it's 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
They have an interesting section too where they talk about, okay, well, what do you do? And their advice is a common theme I'm seeing repeated in a lot of different places, which is educate yourself, right? And then
That's good advice anyway.
well, yes, and it's the place to start, right? And then educate others, people around you, talk to your friends and family just about facts and realities, and then also advocate with decision makers, with governments and all that. And that's that's their advice of how to change. It's interesting they sort of come at it from not from a technology evolution or a heart love evolution, but from a knowledge evolution. And so and that the obligation there is to take that knowledge and then just to spread it outwards. So good for them. Nuclear war. But I don't would you agree not an extinction threat?
Yeah, I think we could probably, as a species, survive a nuclear war, but certainly not as a civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're probably right. That's probably the direst threat on that list of the four.
Yeah. Like the most near term.
The most probable.
Yeah.
Although a lot of very smart people who know a lot about AI are deathly afraid of that.
Yes, I was just about to hit AI. You are just the master of transitions now, Tom. I'm gonna buy you a sundae or something. So Elon Musk, right, is one of these people who is really sounding the alarm. He's had, so I think we mentioned before, a little bit of a public spat back and forth with Zuckerberg on Facebook, who's less dire about AI.
Mm-hmm.
But Musk has a couple of quotes that AI is the biggest risk that we face as a civilization, needs to be checked as soon as possible. And once there's awareness of it, people will be extremely afraid, as they should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Stephen Hawking says, quote, "The rise of powerful AI will be either the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity. We do not know which."
Good luck with that.
Exactly. So he talks about killer robots and all that. So obviously this is why they are into interplanetary species. It's a little hard sometimes for me to tease out where Elon is coming from because he does have so many business interests involved in this, right? So he's obviously advancing many different things, electrical cars and bullet trains and the Mars expeditions at a rate that we otherwise would not be. But he does have a huge financial interest as well. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't really know a lot about artificial intelligence, but I see that a lot of people who do know a lot about it are very concerned. So that makes me think that I should be learning more about it.
Right.
Or perhaps they're all reading the same book. I don't know.
Exactly. I think you can, on one hand, think of it in a somewhat cartoonish way, like The Matrix. Like they're all going to come down and wage crazy war on us because they're mean.
Yeah.
I think the nearer term threat is taking something like a weapon and instituting some sophisticated artificial intelligence into it, where you just drop it into an environment, give it a goal, learn the environment, and then kill as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Those, and then whatever imagination you can have from variations on that.
And that also can join up with nanotech too.
Right. So to close out my four horsemen of the man-made apocalypse, this I found the most fun to research. So, and this is one that was not on my radar before Wikipedia's global catastrophic risk article turned me onto it. So nanotech is basically what we've been talking about, but on a much smaller level, right? And its ability to infiltrate in places that you can't detect, and also its ability to infiltrate into biology and do nasty things. So one of the great examples of this is a thing called gray goo.
I love gray goo.
Yes. Have you run across this concept before?
I have, yeah. It's it's the idea. What's the word? There's a word that goes along with that gray goo. Ecophagy.
Yes.
The eating of the environment, basically.
Yes.
That you can create a nanotechnology that is self-replicating and uses its environment to make more of itself until it has a runaway reaction to the point where there's nothing left except itself.
Right. So this is slightly different than like the evil AI theory. This is just logic, draw it to the logical end of its conclusion. If you programmed a system and you gave it the ability to evolve itself and you gave it access and you told it to acquire resources and achieve a goal, if you weren't careful, you could have it destroy civilization. It's like the funny example of this is the paperclip maximizer. So careful, you Linux programmers, if you're writing a little bot to create paperclips and you gave it the ability to acquire resources in whatever manner it chose, it could very quickly start killing you because it determined, to acquire your resources, it can create more paperclips, and so take over the electrical grid of the planet, and then ultimately destroy all human civilization. So that's a fun one. There was a nice little link in the Grey Goo page as well called "See Also Astro Chicken."
Astro Chicken, what's that?
So I now have a new rule about surfing the internet. If you ever are careening about the cosmos and you find a link that says "See Also Astro Chicken," you have to click it.
Those are some of my favorite links on the Wikipedia. Is what's at the bottom at that. See also. There's always some great stuff down there.
Absolutely, it's totally worth it. And I like our podcast format, Tom, because I don't feel obligated to follow the natural next logical link in order to deeply understand the concept. I could just take whatever fun little tangent, and limit my understanding of the concept as a result.
Astro Chicken.
So Astro Chicken is a thought experiment by Freeman Dyson. So we've talked about his Dyson spheres before.
Yep.
And so he contemplated an application of this sort of gray goo nanotech. So Astro Chicken would be launched as a conventional spacecraft into space, like an egg you're laying into space. But in this case, it's a combination of bio and tech, where you have a very sophisticated AI that has a solar collector, feeds on some ion drive engine or ultra efficient engine, and then once it entered a planet's vicinity, it would collect material from the environment, from the moons and the rings, take those in it as nutrients, evolve whatever ship it was most efficient to project itself to the next system, and on and on and on. So you just very barely define the seed and how the seed can operate, and then allow that to propagate throughout the universe.
It's a wonder that this hasn't happened yet. Exactly. Somewhere else in the universe. I mean, that's a great filter too.
Yeah, I thought you would like this idea because if you're trying to become interplanetary, one way to do it is to build a ginormous Ark type ship, right? That has everything you might possibly need for interstellar and interplanetary. In other words, you take the resources you have here and the design that you have here, and then you move that off the planet. As opposed to baking all the knowledge of how you acquire resources and how you evolve yourself and how you create systems that will sustain humans, baking that into an AI and just lightly touching the design, just to give it a little head start, right? Little water, little sun for the seed, and you allow that seed to then propagate throughout the universe. I mean, you could do that with 100,000 of these, and then depending on which ones found a suitable environment, those would evolve and propagate, and there you go. So that was the end of those were my 4 horsemen of the man-made apocalypse.
Okay, good. Nuclear war is the most probable one, we think, but the other ones are just as bad.
Yes. And in fact, I might even put climate change ahead of what is likely to happen in terms of risk. I think that's pretty much 100%. Like it's already happening.
Yeah, that ship has sailed.
Yeah. So there you go. The natural disaster. So I'm guessing that when you penciled in your apocalypse list, Tom, most of yours were from the natural end of the spectrum. Am I right? Given your astronomy penchant?
I think, yeah. As far as existential risk to humanity, I think most potential apocalypses that we really need to be worried about are from external sources, I think. I'm a big fan of the Big Dumb Rock.
Right.
An asteroid or a comet hitting the Earth has a lot greater chance of just destroying everything than any of those things on that man-made list, I think. And that can happen at any time. We don't have to wait for something. There's no prerequisites for that to happen. It can happen. It can happen tomorrow.
Right. So I'm not up on my power magnitude comparison list. So is a super meteor, could we achieve that same level of destruction through a massive exchange of nuclear weapons, or does based on the size of the meteor, could it still exceed?
Oh, it depends on the size of the object. Depends on the size of the impactor. You could have a small scale impact that could certainly cause a systems collapse.
Right.
That takes thousands of years for human civilization to recover from, or you could have a extension level event that wipes out everything. I
mean, we had it with the dinosaurs.
Yeah, that was probably a medium sized rock.
Right. Are you as worried about supervolcanoes like the one under Yellowstone?
Yeah, I would be worried about that too, because that's another thing that has happened before in the past. It's not theoretical that these things exist. These have affected life on Earth, and there's been extinctions based on supervolcano eruptions. I think the last major one, I think there was like one like 70,000 years ago that
Right.
almost wiped out humanity. I think humans, based on genetic studies, they determined that humans about 70,000 years ago, all humans today are basically derived from a population of about 1,000 or so individuals from 70,000 years ago,
Wow.
which was
Small family.
around the time of a supervolcano eruption.
Wow. So yeah, I guess so I don't know enough about the frequency of those level events, but it certainly bounds how long we have on this planet to try and get off it, I suppose, eh? I mean, it could happen tomorrow, even though it's not any single day. It's extremely unlikely. It's inevitable, and so yeah, those are hard to predict, eh?
Yeah, I mean, and they've happened before in the past.
Mm.
In the time span of the 4 billion years that the Earth has been here, they've been impacted by comets and asteroids a number of times. Then there's been a number of supervolcano eruptions that have caused a lot of devastation and extinctions.
Right.
There's been several times. There's been loads of times where the magnetic poles of the Earth have reversed. That's another thing that can cause a lot of havoc if that ever happens.
I was really into this topic a few years ago.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I sort of spun myself up into probably some more hysterical corners of the internet than I typically frequent.
yeah.
So yeah, so this is cool. So we saw just during the total eclipse, right? We saw the corona, and so periodically the corona will eject a portion of itself. The sun will eject a portion of its corona, a coronal
mass ejection.
Mass ejection, exactly. And so it hurtles towards the Earth and interferes with our magnetosphere, and that's why we get the cool northern lights. But occasionally it can be so intense that it can affect our electrical systems. There was a famous event, I think it was in the late 70s or 80s in Quebec, where it wiped out it knocked out the power supply. And so the last time we've had a major CME event of that impact was way pre-internet. Civilization was obviously electrified, but it was not connected. Like all of our systems, all of our safety, and all of our weapons, all of our service systems are all connected into that. They all depend on the grid. We've created this point of dependency. So from my understanding, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, we sort of have a fortunate happenstance in that because the structure of the magnetosphere is such that when these CMEs come in, it hits the side of the magnetosphere.
Right. And they're funneled towards the poles of the Earth, which is why we have the auroras.
Right. And so it's like if you think of the magnetosphere as emanating from the North and South Pole, which right now happen to be the top and the bottom of roughly where the Earth is spinning on its axis.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah. There's two sort of weak points in there. But because those weak points aren't facing the sun, you don't get the full Monty of the impact of the CME. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So therefore, if your poles are going to reverse, you are going to leave your Earth quite exposed for an extended period of time.
Yeah, it's thought that this is a process that's thought to be naturally occurring, that for some reason to do with what's going on inside the mantle and the core of the Earth, that the magnetosphere of the Earth can occasionally change polarity. So north and south basically flips. And it's thought that during those transition periods, the magnetic field of the Earth can be either disrupted or very weak.
Yes, from what I understand, there's some vaguely agreed upon bounds, but there's certainly no consensus about like how long it takes for the poles to reverse, to what level of exposure there is. And I've seen some theories where you could have multiple poles all over the Earth, right? And that kind of and that again, this isn't a theory. That it's definitely happened. They detected the last major one happened 800,000 years ago, and that we're kind of overdue. Although I keep saying that about these natural things, right? Well, a supervolcano, we're kind of overdue. Earthquake in California, we're kind of overdue. So yeah, so that concerns me, and it can happen suddenly. And so if you sync that weakness up with high solar activity, then we could be in for it, right? We don't know how human civilization with this level of digitalification interacts with the natural environment.
Yeah, if we lost our magnetic field, it would certainly cause a major disruption to our modern technology and could cause a systems collapse, which could lead to other societal problems. And if you look at Mars, Mars was a planet that had oceans. It had an environment that was a lot closer to Earth at some point in the past, but it lost its magnetic field, and now it's just been sterilized by radiation from the sun.
Right.
So the magnetic field is vital. If we want to stay on this planet, we got to make sure we have a magnetic field.
Yeah, dude, keep buying those magnets, kids.
Yep.
So we have one because the theory is that the inner core is liquid iron. Is that correct?
There's a dynamo of churning iron material within the interior of the Earth that causes a magnetic field. Yeah, that's the thinking, I think. But it's not something that's well understood, I don't think. So as far as what the effects would be if the pole did suddenly reverse, we'll have to find out when it happens.
Exactly. Not a lot of direct observations of the Earth's inner core.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at Mars, though, it has a very weak or disrupted magnetic field now because of something that's happened in the interior of that planet. And basically, the planet is a lifeless rock now. At one point in the past, it had a much more friendlier environment.
Right. Before we get to my last couple of favorites, Tom, anything to say about superviruses? I know very little about biology other than if we have a very effective virus that we can't do anything about, that we're not in a good place. So yeah. I just read that word and I'm like, okay, you're on the list.
Yeah, a pandemic would be certainly a very real possibility, I think. It's kind of hard to, I think it's kind of hard to predict something like that, but it certainly have a big effect.
It makes me want to classify it as a catastrophe and not an extinction event because with so many billions of people, you have to think there's got to be some few mutated gene examples that are going to be resistant enough to continue to propagate the species.
Yeah, it's not going to extinguish life because the pandemic, the virus itself is going to be life. So something's going to survive.
All right, there you go. It's just another form of life. Yeah, and I had alien incursion on this list, although I think I just talked myself out of it a few minutes ago with the explanation for the Fermi paradox there. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, maybe it's just my naive nature or hoping for beneficence, but I don't worry too much about like the Centauran Empire coming in and blasting us all to the next dimension. That sci-fi concept of an aggressive civilization that has achieved interstellar capacity like that. I almost feel like, to sort of combine the notions of technological and consciousness evolution, I almost feel like there's an inhibiting factor to technological evolution that in order to achieve a certain level, you have to cooperate. You have to have some advanced level of valuing of the other, because otherwise there's just too much opportunity to destroy each other and knock yourselves back. So I don't worry too much about violent civilizations, but you never know.
You think if someone's violent enough to want to destroy us, they would have destroyed themselves far sooner than that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more probable threats than alien incursion, like a gamma ray burst, I guess. That's another one of my favorites.
That was the last one on my list. So I have never heard of gamma ray bursts, Tom.
Well, neither had most of humanity until the last few decades, when they started sending up satellites, and they were, basically to detect nuclear testing between the Cold War powers. They started seeing huge gamma ray spikes from out there in the universe, coming from basically every direction, that were most powerful energy explosions measured ever of all time, and they're basically happening all the time somewhere out there in the universe. And if ever one happened in our neighborhood and was directed at the Earth, it would basically just microwave us in a second.
Right. Yeah, I found this fascinating. So I'm still learning my electromagnetic spectrum, Tom, after 25 years. I must have been totally asleep in physics class. But basically, so gamma rays are on the far, I'm going to get this wrong, the far upper end of the EM spectrum. Is that correct? So visible light is this narrow band in the middle.
Yep.
And then gamma rays are on an extreme end of it. So all energy is some wavelength form of propagation through the electromagnetic spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So the light that's coming from my light bulb right now is the same thing as gamma rays. Gamma rays just have a different wavelength property. Is that correct?
It's electromagnetic radiation, right?
I feel like I'm learning a lot from you, Tom, through these discussions. I'm filling a lot of holes in my basic knowledge of hard science area.
But they're on the high energy end rather than the other end of the spectrum.
Like wicked high energy end. So my favorite quote from the Wikipedia entry on gamma rays: a typical burst releases as much energy in a few seconds as the sun will in its entire 10 billion year lifetime.
Yes.
Dude, so this is from like collision of black holes. What was the thing above supernova? It's called hypernova. Like just the most ridiculous energy explosions.
Yeah, these are all theoretical explanations of what these possibly could be. I mean,
okay.
No one predicted these things would be out there. They just started observing them once they started observing our universe on the outside of our atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it's scary when you think about how they're basically going off all the time somewhere in the universe. And these are all happening in different and distant galaxies. But they're so high energy that we can see them from here, and they're just like a fraction of a second. But if they were ever close enough to be and focused enough to hit the Earth directly, it would just cook everything immediately. It would just destroy all life. No escape.
Yeah, so for that kind of thing, I classify as preparedness level 0.
That's a hell of a filter.
If that thing's coming for us, I just, I tip my glass and say, well done, universe. We're going bye-bye. Thanks for the ride.
Yeah.
There is nothing you can do for that.
So of the naturally occurring apocalypses, what's your vote for? Who do you put your bet on?
In terms of likely of blowing out the species?
Yeah.
I'm going to go, Alex, with supervolcanoes for 500.
Okay.
Because my limited understanding is that the geological frequency of those is higher than the astronomical frequency of meteors of the size that would have the same power.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I think we're sooner more likely to advance technology to deflect or deal with an incoming meteor and have more time to do something than with a supervolcano. Supervolcanoes kind of feel like, okay, it's going off. It's definitely going to impact. Whereas with the meteors, we could potentially avoid the impact. There's no moving the volcano off the planet.
That's a good point. Yeah, I would have picked the meteor or the comet hitting us, but a supervolcano is certainly not something you can deflect.
Yeah, exactly.
Or prepare against.
Yeah. Action items. For the man-made catastrophes, again, I sort of take them all in the same basket and say, sort of do what the atomic scientists said to do with knowledge, but with consciousness, and just try and evolve my own feeling so that propagates outward, and as much people can do as much as possible on all those different fronts. I feel like nukes and AI and climate change and nanotech, those are all solvable as long as there is, the heart to do it.
Mm.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
Rock and roll. I was pretty psyched to learn about gamma ray bursts.
Gamma ray bursts, yeah. Gamma ray bursts. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page. First detected in 1967. We had no idea they existed, and now they have the potential to wipe out everything. You think it's better that if we didn't know it all? Would you rather know what's coming, or would you rather be surprised and have it just be instantly over?
This is a totally different question, Tom, which is probably good to end on. So let's say we know the apocalypse is coming. Let's say, forget about catastrophe and all this like highfalutin talk about helping people and minimizing future suffering. Let's say we know the extinction event is coming and there's nothing we can do about it. Let's say we have, I don't know, for the sake of conversation, a week before we are completely wiped out of existence.
Yeah.
What's the plan? Let me make it easier. Let's say you didn't have to deal with global panic, right? Because what's most likely to happen if there was global awareness of extinction that we couldn't do anything about? People would just be running around like chickens with their heads cut off, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, but let's presume and I don't know what form this would take, but just for ease of exploration of the idea, let's just presume you don't have to deal with other people losing their minds. What would you do with your last week?
Read a good book. Lie on the couch for a little bit. Have a nap.
A nap.
Cup of tea.
Nice.
Have a cat on the lap. The things that comfort you.
Yeah, just chill it out.
Yeah.
Have a nice morning tea as you see the hunger approaching from the horizon.
Yep.
Nice. Would we still record the podcast?
I might put that off for another week.
Set the record date to 8 days from now.
Yes.
I don't know. I would feel a slight tinge of obligation to our listeners.
Well, if we do end up recording that episode, it's going to be a hell of an episode.
Yes, it would be. And we could refer back to this conversation and say, see, I told you so.
But would you want to know if it was coming? Or do you just want to?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I am all into staring into the void.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's good. I think that's why I like thinking about death, Tom. That's one of the reasons I like thinking about death. One is that it's one of the great unexplored mysteries, and it has major impact into how we understand consciousness. But it's more anything that can heighten my moment's awareness of my own mortality, I feel like motivates me more. It gives me this like free energy to want to take advantage of every moment. I mean, at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, when I'm going to sleep, my level of peace with myself and the day is largely a function of how I feel I've utilized my time for the day.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I took total advantage of it, I don't mean like I have to have chopped 5,000 pieces of wood and been extremely productive at work. And I mean just that, just in terms of just like being keenly aware of the preciousness of time and the value of time, and then doing with it what I want to do with it is what's most satisfying to me. So anything that can help remind me of that, I value. Like, not to get too morbid on you, but we have been talking about apocalypse in depth for 2 hours. But when I come out of a funeral, particularly if it's for somebody that I wasn't that close to, maybe like a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a situation where I'm not dealing with a lot of intense personal emotion, but I'm just sort of heightening my awareness of the end of other life and how it affects other people and all that. I always feel like I walk away from those experiences in a better place, like where I feel like my consciousness has been expanded or raised in a good way. And it sort of happens without me doing anything. I just show up at the funeral or whatever. And it happens also at graduations, like either that I'm not participating in for, or that aren't affecting, again, my own kid, right? So I don't have that intense personal emotional connection that I'm sure I'll have when my kids graduate high school or college or whatever. But it gives me that same sense of finality and transition, and that things that can seem so intense at the moment end. And so I get this sort of like boost. I feel like it's like free magic that I get for nothing. And then it can fade, you go back to your job and whatever. I kind of feel like it's this like nice little gift that I can then actualize on. I find going to a funeral inspiring.
Okay. I don't think I want to know when the end's coming.
No.
No, I'd be happy that they just do kill process on the simulation and have it be done with.
Okay. I promise if I know it's coming, I won't tell you.
Perfect.
All right.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder that you can find Two Big Geeks on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. If you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Thank you.